I've only just watched this post-fight press conference and this post-fight interview for the Jermell Charlo Tony Harrison fight. Several people immediately after the fight asked for my thoughts on it. So now that I've seen it, these are my thoughts. I've spoken many times in the past, in numerous videos, about how many, if not most, top-level fighters have a glass is half full mentality. You see, you can see a glass which is filled halfway up, and you can perceive that as being half full or half empty, depending on your mental disposition, if you're a pessimist or an optimist. It's all about perception. Top-level fighters tend to perceive things in an optimistic fashion, at least when it comes to their own performances and their own ability. This is why the worst person to be able to score a fight objectively is one of the participants who's taken part in the fight. During the fight, they're the worst people to be able to score it, because when they're in the ring fighting another man, they're not concentrating on what the other man is doing to them. They're concentrating on what they're doing to the opponent, to the other man. That's what sticks in their head the most. The punches they're landing on the other guy, not the punches the other guy is landing on them, because they have a glass is half full, optimistic mentality where they concentrate far more on what they themselves are doing good than what the other guy is doing good. And this is why so many fighters in close fights or fights that they sometimes, fights which the majority of people believe that they lost, this is why so many fighters after the fight will believe that they won, even when most people don't. Or believe they won convincingly when most people think it was a close fight. This is why, because of this glass is half full mentality that so many top-level fighters have. And what you have to understand is that as Chris Eubank Sr. has mentioned before, to make it at the top level in boxing takes an incredible amount of self-belief. Not just when you're at the top, dealing with all that pressure, but even to get to the top. The self-belief, the drive, the determination it takes is incredible, and so much so that a particular type of character tends to be the one who reaches the top. And this is a character who tends to trust themselves and trust their own judgment more so than they trust the judgment of other people. If you listen to Evander Holyfield or George Foreman or Mike Tyson or many other great fighters throughout history, and you listen to their stories of how they got into boxing, very often you'll hear them say that their friends and family members doubted them. That they even had friends and family members who told them, "You're dreaming, you're deluded, you're never going to be heavyweight champion of the world or middleweight champion of the world. You're never going to be able to do that. You need to concentrate on getting a real job." This is what so many great fighters were told growing up. But what did they do? They didn't listen to the naysayers in their own family, in their friend circle. Even in the gyms, some of these fighters were not believed in by trainers, coaches, etc. People didn't believe in them, but they believed in themselves. So they tend to trust their own judgment more so than they trust the judgment of other people. And this grows and grows the more success they have. So when you reach the level of a world champion and you've been learning to trust yourself and listen to yourself more so, it's not like you don't listen to other people at all, because you will have people who assist you, and you will have, over the course of your amateur career, once you start becoming successful, people who do start believing in you. But ultimately, for most of these fighters, it all comes down to their own self-belief. And again, having this level of self-belief means that you will often be perceived as deluded. Yeah, this is again something Chris Eubank Sr. said to make it at the top level in boxing, you have to be deluded, or you have to tread that thin line between self-confidence and self-delusion. And so Jermell Charlo right now is a victim of his own ego and of his own self-delusion. He is trying to say that he won the fight hands down. It was some kind of robbery. It wasn't a robbery. Those of us watching the fight from the outside objectively know that this was a close fight, a very boring fight, very dull fight, but it was a relatively close one. You certainly can't complain about Tony Harrison getting a decision. There was no robbery here, nothing of the sort. If Charlo had won the fight by a round or two, I wouldn't have complained. Harrison winning the fight by a couple of rounds, no complaints from me. But Charlo believing it was some kind of robbery shows you his mentality throughout the fight. That he had this glasses half full mentality in every round. He was concentrating on what he was doing well every round, not what his opponent was doing well. Now, without this kind of... See, a lot of fans struggle to understand this. They struggle to understand that without fighters having this kind of mentality, they wouldn't be able to succeed in boxing, most of them. Because they'd have too many doubts creeping in. When they have a bad round, they'd be feeling down about themselves. And of course, that does happen. But when you're in a fight which is relatively close, you're not taking a beating. If you have doubts creeping in, like, oh, maybe I lost that round and, oh, God, this, that, and the other, it can work against you. It can bring your confidence down. And if your confidence goes down, your performance can deteriorate. With that being said, it is good to be confident, but also be realistic. Now, Jermell Charlo probably felt that there was no chance that a close decision would go against him because he's the champion. Probably feels like he's a bit of a golden child, a bit entitled. And because of that, he probably didn't feel the need to really go hell for leather and try and take Tony Harrison out to stop this fight going the distance. Not that that's really his forte anyway. Jermell Charlo is not a great pressure fighter, not a great front foot fighter. He's more of a, I don't want to say counterpuncher, he can't counterpunch, but he's more of a boxer puncher. He likes you to come to him rather than having to go hunting you down. But he didn't feel the need to hunt Tony Harrison down because he felt like it was all under control and he would get the benefit of the doubt in these close rounds. But, again, in his mind, he probably didn't think the rounds were that close. The glass is half full mentality. He's probably not cognizant of the fact that he has this glass is half full mentality. You see, one of the things about fighters is that a lot of them are operating on instinct when it comes to their psychological makeup. They're not breaking it down the way I break it down. They just, behave. It's like, for example, there are many great fighters who are not very good trainers. And one of the reasons that they're not good trainers is because they haven't really thought about how they did what they were doing in the ring. They acted on instinct. It was subconscious, a lot of the decisions they made in the ring, the way that they fought, their emotional state, the tactical choices that they made. A lot of this is instinctive. A lot of this is innate. They don't think about it consciously. A lot of it is subconscious. So when it comes to teaching someone else what you have been doing for decades in the ring, you're not quite sure where to start because you haven't really self-analyzed. You understand? You haven't really broken it down. You say, well, how do I do this? And why do I do that? And you haven't really analyzed your own behavior. You haven't really analyzed what you're doing in the ring. You're just listening to your trainers and you're instinctively knowing where you should move and Do you understand what I'm saying? Hopefully I'm making sense. And similarly here, Jermell Charlo probably has never analyzed himself. Doesn't really understand his own psyche. And in some cases, it might be better for fighters not to understand their own psyche or certain elements of their own psyche. It might be best for them not to understand it. There is an old adage that ignorant people sleep better at night than intelligent people. Because an intelligent person is going to sit up all night thinking about the possibilities of this could happen, that could happen, factoring this in, factoring that in. They may understand the magnitude of any situation they might be in, a difficult situation. When they realize all the complexities of it and all the different possibilities that could arise, all the different consequences. An ignorant person is less likely to think about all that. So they're more likely to sleep well at night because they ain't so worried because they don't think very deep. Now, in some situations, it can work in the opposite way, but a lot of the time it is certainly true. Someone who isn't so cognizant, someone who isn't so aware might be in a better place in terms of their confidence level. It's all about perception. And Jermell Charlo's perception right now has led to a situation where he feels like he's been robbed. Will Jermell Charlo learn from this? Will he become a better fighter because of this? Well, it remains to be seen. In terms of him breaking down and crying, I mean, it just shows how out of touch with reality he was. Talking about we don't take no losses and all this kind of business. Again, that whole we don't take no losses stuff is him being a victim of his own ego. And it is mental fragility. But then again, in the post-fight interview, he did say great fighters have lost and so on and so forth. So, he definitely needs to get it together. He definitely needs to stop feeling so entitled. He needs to grow mentally as a fighter and mature and come back a lot hungrier and realize that you can't just go in there and fight a low volume fight where you barely landed any clean punches on the other guy and expect to get the benefit of the doubt every time. You can't do that. That's called resting on your laurels. You got to put the work in, man. You got to hurt people. When you're in there with a slickster like Tony Harrison, you can't allow him to look slick. Never mind be slick or whatever you think he's not doing to you. No, you have to make sure that nobody can perceive this fight as him being slick and outboxing you. And the way you do that is by putting a hurting on the man. Jermell Charlo was boxing him. That's what he was doing for the most part. Wasn't applying effective pressure. Very low volume. It's no good. You're not Canelo. You're not going to get the benefit of the doubt every time. You're not on that level. This is the realization that Jermell Charlo is going to have to come to. You're not a superstar in the game. You got to work your way up, And so hopefully he'll realize these things and he'll grow from this. We'll see. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Is this a sign of weakness in Jermell Charlo's psyche? Because it was, to me, a moment where I shook my head watching him sobbing at a post-fight press conference, because it's not as if he came for a life and death battle, is it? If you came for a life and death fight where you were dropped twice, you dropped the other guy, it was like the Thriller in Manila, a very emotional experience, then you crying at the post-fight presser, to me, would be more understandable. But when you're in a fight where I mean, you can barely call it a fight. It was more like a tickling contest in there. When you're in a dull 12-rounder, where neither of you landed any significant shots, for the most part, and you both came out looking like you hadn't even been in a fight, very low volume, to me it's a little, a little concerning that you would be so emotional about a fight like that after the fact. You didn't get beaten up. You didn't beat the other guy up. And you're all emotional about a dull fight like that. Yeah. Jermell Charlo is deluded, but he needs a certain level of delusion, as most top fighters do, to be able to do this. It's not normal people who can make it at a top level in boxing. You can't have a normal person's mentality. A normal person will listen to naysayers. A normal person will have doubts, or more doubts than these top level fighters have. So don't expect these fighters to think like the average Joe on the street. They're not going to think like you. That's why they can do what they do and you can't, because they don't think like you. They don't think like me. You understand? Their mindset is different than the average Joe. Okay, so they're going to need a certain level of glass is half full mentality, or delusion as it's often perceived by people, to be able to make it. Let me know how you feel about everything I've talked about in this video and your perception of Jermell Charlo's behavior after his loss to Tony Harrison. Let me know, people. It's happening. I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.